The young schoolteacher's trembling hands clutched the letter so tightly that her knuckles turned white as she read the words that would forever change her life. The tiny frontier town of Whispering Creek, Colorado needed a teacher, and they needed one fast. Beatrice Blackwell stared out the train window at the endless landscape of golden prairie grass and distant mountains, wondering if she had made the biggest mistake of her life by accepting the position. The year was 1878, and at 22 years old, she had never ventured farther west than Chicago. Now here she was, heading to a town barely 10 years old, where outlaws still roamed and civilization clung by a thread to the untamed wilderness. The train whistle shrieked as they approached the Whispering Creek station, little more than a wooden platform beside a water tower. Beatrice gathered her modest belongings, 2 trunks containing her books, clothing, and the few mementos she had brought from Boston. Her stomach knotted with anxiety as the train lurched to a halt. Whispering Creek, 10 minutes only, the conductor called out. Beatrice stepped onto the platform, the dry mountain air immediately filling her lungs. The small town sprawled before her, a single dirt street lined with wooden buildings, some with false fronts attempting to appear grander than they were. Men in dusty clothes and wide-brimmed hats moved purposefully along the boardwalks. Women in practical frontier dresses carried baskets and hurried children along. It looked nothing like the Boston she had left behind. Miss Blackwell, a stern-faced older woman, approached her. "I'm Mrs. Humphrey, head of the town council. We've been expecting you." Beatrice extended her hand. "Thank you for meeting me. I'm eager to begin my duties." Mrs. Humphrey's eyes narrowed as she studied the young woman before her. "You're younger than we expected, and quieter. The children here need a firm hand. They're not like city children." "I assure you I'm quite capable," Beatrice replied, her voice barely audible above the bustle of the platform. Mrs. Humphrey frowned. "You'll need to speak up if you expect to control a classroom of frontier children. They'll run roughshod over you otherwise." A flush crept up Beatrice's neck. Throughout her life she had heard the same criticism: too quiet, too reserved, too bookish. Even her parents had worried about her shy nature, wondering if she would ever find a husband when she could barely make herself heard at social gatherings. "My teaching credentials are excellent," Beatrice said, forcing more volume into her voice. "My methods may be different, but they are effective." Mrs. Humphrey looked unconvinced but nodded toward a wagon where a young boy waited. "Tommy will help with your trunks. You'll be boarding at the Peterson place until we determine if you're suitable." The implication was clear. Beatrice was on probation. The schoolhouse sat on the edge of town, a simple one-room building with rows of rough-hewn desks. The next morning, Beatrice arrived early, arranging her books and papers with methodical precision. Her heart raced as she heard the first children approaching outside. The door burst open, and a flood of children ranging from 6 to 16 poured in, their curious eyes fixed on their new teacher. Beatrice took a deep breath and opened her mouth to greet them, but a commotion at the door drew everyone's attention. "Move aside, you little varmints," a deep voice called out as 2 boys tumbled through the doorway, locked in combat. A tall figure filled the doorframe, strong hands reaching down to separate the brawling boys with ease. "That's no way to welcome your new teacher." Beatrice's breath caught in her throat. The man before her embodied everything she had imagined a frontiersman would be: tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer sky. His clothing was practical: worn denim pants, a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal muscular forearms, and scuffed leather boots. A cowboy hat hung from a leather cord around his neck, resting against his back. "Ethan Prescott, madam," he said with a slight tip of his head. "Sheriff's deputy. Thought I'd escort the Weaver boys to school today. They have a habit of finding trouble between their farm and your doorstep." "Thank you, Mr. Prescott," Beatrice managed, her voice softer than she intended. "I appreciate the assistance." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps? But he merely nodded and gave each boy a stern look before turning to leave. At the door, he paused. "Good luck, Miss Blackwell. These young'uns can be wilder than unbroken colts, but they've got good hearts." The day progressed with predictable challenges. The older boys tested her authority at every turn, the young ones fidgeted constantly, and several of the girls openly whispered about her Eastern clothes and quiet manner. By afternoon, Beatrice's throat was raw from trying to project her voice over the growing chaos. When the final bell rang, the children erupted from their seats and streamed out the door, leaving Beatrice alone with the mess of a first day. She sank into her chair, fighting back tears of frustration. "Rough start," she jumped at the voice. Deputy Prescott stood in the doorway again, hat in hand. "I'll improve," she said defensively. He stepped inside, looking around at the scattered papers and overturned inkwell someone had accidentally knocked over. "No doubt. But these kids are used to old Mr. Henderson, who could bellow like a bull and wasn't afraid to use a switch. Your methods might take some getting used to." "My methods include respect and discipline without shouting or physical punishment," Beatrice replied, straightening her spine. "If that's unacceptable here—" "I didn't say that," he interrupted, a smile touching the corners of his mouth. "Just offering some perspective." "Mind if I help you clean up?" Without waiting for an answer, he began picking up papers and straightening desks. Beatrice watched him for a moment, then joined in, surprised by his consideration. "Why are you helping me, Deputy Prescott?" He paused, those startling blue eyes meeting hers. "Everyone deserves a fair chance to succeed, Miss Blackwell, even quiet schoolteachers from back east." They worked in companionable silence for several minutes before he spoke again. "You know, my sister was a quiet one too, smartest person I ever knew, but you had to lean in to hear her wisdom." "And where is she now?" A shadow crossed his face. "She passed on 3 years ago, influenza." "I'm sorry," Beatrice said softly. "Me too." He placed the last book on the shelf. "Thing is, she would have made a fine teacher like yourself." Had a way of commanding respect without raising her voice. It was like people naturally leaned in to hear what she had to say, and in that leaning, they showed respect. The observation struck Beatrice deeply. No one had ever framed her quietness as potentially powerful. "Thank you for that perspective, Mr. Prescott." "Ethan," he corrected with a smile. "We don't stand on much ceremony in Whispering Creek." "Then I'm Beatrice." He nodded, placing his hat back on his head. "Well, Beatrice, I'll leave you to it. But if those Weaver boys give you any more trouble, just let me know." As the days passed, Beatrice developed her own approach to the classroom. Rather than trying to outshout her students, she employed a small brass bell. When she rang it, the children gradually learned that they needed to quiet down and pay attention. For those who refused, she assigned extra studies rather than physical punishment, and slowly, respect began to grow. She often saw Ethan around town, and he would tip his hat to her or stop for a brief conversation. She learned he had come west after the war, seeking a new beginning after losing his family farm in Tennessee. He'd been in Whispering Creek for 5 years, serving as deputy to the aging sheriff. One afternoon, as Beatrice was walking home from school, a sudden commotion erupted from the saloon. 2 men burst through the swinging doors, fists flying. Before she could cross to the other side of the street, one man pulled a knife. "Drop it, Matthews." Ethan's commanding voice cut through the shouts of the gathering crowd. He stood with his hand on his holstered gun, feet planted firmly in the dusty street. The man with the knife snarled, "This ain't your business, Prescott." "You made it my business when you pulled steel on Main Street," Ethan replied evenly. "Now drop it before I have to do something we'll both regret." For a tense moment, Beatrice thought the man would lunge. Instead, he spat in the dirt and tossed his knife down. "Fine." "But this ain't over, Carter," he growled at the other man. Ethan stepped forward, collected the knife, and firmly guided Matthews toward the jail. As he passed Beatrice, he gave her a reassuring nod. "Evening, Miss Blackwell. Don't worry, just a disagreement over cards." She watched him lead the man away, struck by his calm authority. Unlike the dime novels she'd read about wild Western lawmen, Ethan didn't rely on bravado or intimidation. He commanded respect through quiet confidence, much as she was trying to do with her students. The following Saturday, Beatrice was struggling with a heavy bucket of water outside her boarding house when a horse and rider approached. "Need a hand with that?" Ethan dismounted in one fluid motion. "Thank you," she said, relinquishing the bucket. "Mrs. Peterson is visiting her sister, and I wanted to water her flower garden." "Noble of you," he commented, easily carrying the bucket to the scraggly patch of petunias Mrs. Peterson cultivated with fierce determination. Most newcomers wouldn't bother. "They bring her joy," Beatrice replied simply. "That seems worth preserving." He studied her for a moment. "I'm heading up to Crystal Lake this afternoon. The trout are biting and it's a fine day for a picnic. Would you care to join me?" The invitation surprised her. "Is that appropriate?" "I mean, as the town's teacher, we'd be in full view of God and nature," he said with a grin. "And I promise to have you back before sunset. Mrs. Peterson need never worry about your reputation." Beatrice hesitated only briefly. "I'd like that." An hour later, they rode out of town, Beatrice on a gentle mare Ethan had borrowed from the livery. The mountain trail wound through stands of aspen and pine, opening occasionally to reveal breathtaking vistas of the surrounding peaks. Beatrice had never experienced such grandeur. "It's magnificent," she breathed as they paused at a particularly spectacular overlook. "Different from Boston, I imagine," Ethan said, watching her face. "Completely. There, everything is contained, controlled. Here." She gestured at the wild landscape. "Nature reminds you how small you truly are." "Does that frighten you?" She considered his question seriously. "No, it makes me feel more alive somehow." He smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his rugged features. "That's how I knew I belonged here. First time I saw these mountains, something inside me recognized home." Crystal Lake lived up to its name, a perfect oval of clear blue water nestled in a high mountain meadow. Wildflowers dotted the grassy shore, and the surface rippled with jumping fish. They spent the afternoon in easy companionship. Ethan caught several trout, which they cooked over a small fire. Beatrice shared the apple pie Mrs. Peterson had baked the previous day. As the sun began to drop toward the western peaks, they sat side by side on a fallen log. "How are things at the school?" Ethan asked. "Improving," Beatrice replied. "The children are starting to trust my methods. Even Mrs. Humphrey seemed less disapproving when she observed my class yesterday. I hear Tommy Wilson has started speaking up in class." His mother was amazed. "Boy's barely said a word since his father died in that mining accident last year." Beatrice nodded. "He has a brilliant mind for mathematics. I've been giving him special problems to solve." "See," Ethan bumped her shoulder gently with his, "your quiet ways have power." "Perhaps," she acknowledged. "Though I still hear whispers in town. That quiet Eastern girl won't last the winter." "People fear what they don't understand," Ethan said. "Out here, survival often depends on being loud enough to scare off bears and bold enough to face down claim jumpers. They don't recognize that strength comes in many forms." "And what form do you think my strength takes, Deputy Prescott?" she asked, surprising herself with the directness of her question. He turned to face her fully, his expression serious. "You listen before you speak. You observe before you act. In a land where most shoot first and ask questions later, that's rarer than gold." His words warmed her more than the afternoon sun. For the first time in her life, someone saw her quietness not as a weakness to overcome, but as a strength to be valued. As autumn painted the aspen groves gold and crimson, Beatrice settled into life in Whispering Creek. Her students' progress became evident as they began to excel in their studies. She started a small lending library from her personal collection, which soon expanded as townspeople donated books they had brought west and rarely opened. Her friendship with Ethan deepened. He escorted her to the Harvest Festival and taught her to ride properly on weekend excursions. They spoke of books and ideas, dreams and disappointments. Never had Beatrice found someone who listened so intently to her soft-spoken observations, who seemed to value her thoughts so genuinely. Yet she kept a careful distance, mindful of her position in the community. As the schoolteacher, she was held to higher standards than others. Any hint of impropriety could jeopardize her standing. Winter arrived with a vengeance in early December. Snow piled in drifts taller than a man, and temperatures plummeted so low that the inkwells froze in the schoolhouse overnight. Beatrice took to arriving an hour early to stoke the stove and thaw the room before her students arrived. On one such morning, she trudged through knee-deep snow, the pre-dawn darkness making her journey treacherous. As she approached the schoolhouse, she noticed the door standing ajar, a faint light flickering inside. Fear clutched at her throat. Vagrants sometimes broke into empty buildings during winter storms. With trembling hands, she retrieved the small derringer she carried in her coat pocket, a gift from Ethan after a mountain lion had been spotted near town. Pushing the door open wider with her foot, she called out, "Hello." "Who's there?" "Just me," Ethan's voice answered, followed by his appearance from behind the stove where he was feeding in wood. "Didn't mean to startle you." Beatrice quickly tucked away the derringer, relief flooding through her. "What are you doing here so early?" "Thought you could use a warm classroom," he said, dusting off his hands. "It's 15 below this morning." The simple kindness nearly undid her. "Thank you," she managed, removing her heavy coat and scarf. Ethan studied her face. "You're looking tired, Beatrice. This winter's been hard on everyone, but especially on you, making this trek every day." "I'm managing," she insisted. "The council's been talking," he said carefully, "about closing the school until spring thaw, too dangerous for the children to be traveling in these conditions." Disappointment washed over her. "But their education can wait a few weeks," he finished gently. "No sense in risking frostbite or worse." She knew he was right, but the prospect of weeks without purpose troubled her. "What will I do with myself?" "Well," he said, suddenly looking uncertain, "that's something I wanted to discuss with you." Before he could continue, the door burst open again. Sheriff Miller stood there, snow covering his hat and shoulders. "Ethan, there you are. We've got trouble." 3 of the Anderson children didn't come home last night after visiting their cousins. Parents think they tried to take the shortcut across Bear Creek. With this snow and cold, Ethan was immediately alert. "I'll get my gear. Organize search parties. How long have they been missing?" "Since yesterday afternoon. Must have gotten caught in that squall that blew through." "I'm coming too," Beatrice said firmly, reaching for her coat. Both men turned to her in surprise. "No offense, Miss Blackwell," the sheriff said, "but this is dangerous work." "We need experienced trackers, and those are my students," she interrupted, her voice quiet but resolute. "I know them. Emily Anderson will be keeping her brothers together, and she's smart enough to find shelter, but she's only 11 and the boys are 8 and 6. They'll be frightened." Ethan and the sheriff exchanged looks. "She has a point," Ethan conceded. "Having someone they trust might make a difference if they're hiding." To Beatrice, he added, "But you stay with me, understand? No wandering off." She nodded, grateful to be included. The search party assembled quickly, 12 men on horseback, plus Beatrice riding double with Ethan. They followed the trail to the Hendricks farm where the children had visited their cousins, then fanned out toward Bear Creek. The snow had obliterated any obvious tracks, and the temperature continued to drop as morning stretched into afternoon. Hope dimmed with each passing hour. Children lost overnight in such conditions rarely survived. "We should check the old mining shack," Beatrice suggested as they paused to consult a map. Emily did a presentation on local history last month. She was fascinated by the silver mining stories. She might have remembered it was there. Ethan considered this. "It's worth trying." "It's about a mile east of here." They pushed their horses through deepening snow, the wind picking up and driving icy particles against their faces. The abandoned shack appeared suddenly through the swirling white, a dark, crooked structure half buried in a snowdrift. "Emily, Michael, Thomas." Beatrice called as they approached, her voice stronger than Ethan had ever heard it. For a moment, silence answered her. Then, faintly, a child's voice responded, "Miss Blackwell, is that you?" Relief surged through the search party. Inside the dilapidated shack, they found all 3 Anderson children huddled together under a rotting tarp. They were cold and hungry but alive, having taken shelter when the storm overtook them. "I remembered the shack from our history lesson," Emily explained as Ethan wrapped her in his heavy coat. "You said miners built shelters near their claims." "You did exactly right," Beatrice assured her, helping the youngest boy sip from a canteen of hot coffee someone had brought. The return to town was triumphant. The Anderson family's gratitude knew no bounds, and word of Beatrice's crucial role in finding the children spread quickly. She had proven herself not just as a teacher of books, but as someone who cared deeply for her students and whose quiet lessons had practical value. That evening, after the children had been safely returned and the excitement had died down, Ethan escorted Beatrice back to her boarding house. They stood on the porch, snow falling gently around them in the lantern light. "You were remarkable today," he said, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "I was just doing what needed to be done," she replied, embarrassed by the praise. "That's what makes it remarkable." He took her gloved hands in his. "Beatrice, what I wanted to tell you this morning before we were interrupted, the council isn't just closing the school temporarily. They're planning to build a new one in the spring larger with proper heating and a teacher's residence attached so you won't have to make these dangerous journeys." Her eyes widened. "A teacher's residence, you mean? They want you to stay on permanently," he confirmed. "They've been impressed by your results. Even Mrs. Humphrey admits she was wrong about you." Joy filled her heart. "I'd very much like that." "There's more," Ethan continued, looking suddenly nervous. "I've been offered the sheriff's position. Miller's retiring in the spring. He thinks his rheumatism can't take another winter here." "Ethan, that's wonderful," she exclaimed. "It comes with the house at the end of Pine Street, the yellow one with the white trim." He hesitated, then plunged ahead. "It's too big for just one person. I thought perhaps. That is, I hoped." Beatrice had never seen the confident deputy so flustered. Her heart began to race as she realized what he might be trying to say. "Ethan," he took a deep breath. "When I first met you, I thought you might not last a month in Whispering Creek. You seemed too gentle, too refined for frontier life, but I was wrong. Your quiet strength runs deeper than anyone I've known." He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, withdrawing a small object. "This belonged to my mother. I've carried it with me since leaving Tennessee, waiting for the right person." In his palm lay a simple gold ring with a small pearl. "Beatrice Blackwell, I love you, not despite your quiet nature but because of it. In a world of noise and bluster, your thoughtful silence is the most beautiful sound I know." His blue eyes held hers intently. "Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears sprang to her eyes, but for once words came easily. "Yes, Ethan, yes, I will." He slipped the ring onto her finger over her glove, promising a proper fitting later, and then drew her close. Their first kiss was gentle, a promise of the partnership to come. "You know," he murmured against her temple, "folks around here said you were too quiet to please as a frontier teacher." She looked up at him, a smile playing on her lips. "And what did you say?" His expression softened as he brushed a snowflake from her cheek. "I said your quiet pleases me forever." Spring came to Whispering Creek in a rush of melting snow and new beginnings. The town gathered at the newly built church on a perfect May morning in 1879 to witness the marriage of Sheriff Ethan Prescott to schoolteacher Beatrice Blackwell. As Beatrice walked down the aisle, she marveled at how much had changed in less than a year. The timid young woman who had stepped off the train last summer barely resembled the confident bride she had become. She still spoke softly, still preferred books to boisterous gatherings, but she had found her voice and her place in this wild, beautiful country. Ethan waited for her at the altar, his eyes filled with love and pride. As she took his hand, he leaned close and whispered, "Ready for our next adventure, Mrs. Prescott?" Beatrice's answer was quiet but clear, heard by everyone who mattered. "With you always." The yellow house with white trim became a home filled with books and laughter. Beatrice continued teaching, watching her students grow and thrive. Ethan served as sheriff with the same quiet authority that had first drawn her to him, keeping peace in the expanding town without unnecessary force. In the spring of 1880, their first child was born, a daughter they named Catherine, after Ethan's sister. She inherited her mother's thoughtful nature and her father's adventurous spirit. 2 years later, twins James and Joseph joined the family, bringing joyful chaos to the orderly household. Beatrice discovered reserves of patience and strength she never knew she possessed, as she balanced motherhood and teaching. On their 5th anniversary, Ethan took Beatrice back to Crystal Lake for a picnic. As they sat watching the sunset paint the mountains gold, their children playing nearby, he wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "Any regrets?" he asked. "About coming west? About choosing this life?" Beatrice rested her head against him, contemplating the question. She thought of the challenges they had faced: blizzards and drought, illness and hardship, but also of the joy they had found together, the community they had helped build, the family they had created. "Not one," she replied with quiet certainty. "This is exactly where I belong." Ethan pressed a kiss to her temple. "And your quiet still pleases me, forever." In the glow of the setting sun, surrounded by the majesty of the mountains and the love of her family, Beatrice knew that her voice, soft as it might be, had found its perfect resonance in this wild Western home. She had never needed to shout to be heard by those who truly listened. And in that listening, they had all found something precious, a love that spoke volumes in its quietest moments.